At my daughter's wedding, her groom lifted his glass, aimed it right at me, and ridiculed my insignificant existence, making the guests burst into laughter. My daughter timidly bowed her head, but then her father-in-law came up to me, his eyes bulging with surprise, and requested my signature. He knew my true identity. Before we go on, please hit subscribe on the channel and drop a comment with the current time and your location. Micah's words sliced through my living room like shattered shards. Uncle Ted, we get that money's tight for you right now, but this wedding is the world to Vera. I was settled in my worn leather armchair, checkbook open on my knees, pen shaking a bit in my grip. 2 decades in this seat, 2 decades of cozy chats with my daughter. Now she lingered by the window, her fancy heels tapping on my scuffed wooden floors as she fidgeted nervously. I want to contribute. My words emerged firmer than my insides felt. That's the reason you're visiting, isn't it? Micah strode back and forth behind my coffee table, his pricey watch gleaming in the midday sun. Every so often, his gaze roamed over my simple furnishings, the threadbare sofa Eleanor and I had picked up used, the marred coffee table Vera had doodled on as a kid. His face revealed it all. The location costs $35,000 by itself, he went on, glancing at that watch once more. And Dad's handling the food, the music, the decorations. How much are you after? I cut in, sensing the figure would sting. Vera finally pivoted from the window. For an instant, I saw my little girl in her expression, the one who'd scramble into this same chair with storybooks. Then her face toughened up again. $50,000 would be ideal, she murmured softly. The amount struck like a punch to the gut. I flipped open my checkbook, my elderly hands abruptly sensing every bit of my 65 years. The balance glared up at me. 23,016 total. My whole nest egg, scraped together cent by cent since Eleanor passed. 20,000, I stated, ripping out the check with deliberate care. That's all of it. Every last cent I've saved. A chasm of quiet expanded between us. Micah halted his steps, his lips parting a fraction. Then he chuckled. Not meanly, just honestly taken aback. For real, my father will drop more than that solely on the blooms. Warmth rose along my neck. It's what I can manage. Ted, Uncle Ted. Micah corrected himself, his voice easing into what could pass for compassion. I value the offer. Truly. But this is a proper wedding we're discussing. Vera merits more than this. His sweep took in my whole existence. The family snapshots on the shelf, the pile of invoices on my desk, the coffee cooling on the end table. All I'd labored for, all I'd stashed away, brushed aside with a flick of his wrist. Dad? Vera's tone snapped like a lash. But she wasn't standing up for me. She was cautioning him to watch his language. Listen, Micah pressed on, his words gentler now, more insidious. We all know you're scraping by on Social Security and that meager pension from your musician era. This isn't about handouts. It's about what Vera requires for her path ahead. I extended the check regardless, my name still fresh at the base. $20,000. 4 months' worth of my earnings. The funds I'd hoarded for crises, for fixes to this aging home, for the health costs that were bound to arise. Micah didn't accept it. Hang on to it, he said kindly. Perhaps use it to patch that drip in your ceiling. The phrase lingered like haze. I hadn't brought up the leak to a soul. He'd spotted it on his own, the faint watermark on my ceiling. Hardly noticeable unless you searched for it. He'd inventoried my shortcomings, my deficiencies in the quarter hour he'd been present. Vera headed for the door, her heels clacking sharply on my floor. We ought to leave. Vera. I rose, the check still proffered between us. Sweetheart, please. She stopped, her fingers on the doorknob. For a split second, I hoped she'd spin around. Might recall who I am, what we once meant to one another. We'll sort out another way, she replied without facing me. Don't stress over it. The front door swung wide, admitting the noise of cars from the road. Micah trailed her, stopping just to look back at me with what could have been pity. Thanks all the same, Uncle Ted. Then they vanished, leaving behind only the thud of car doors and a motor revving. I stayed upright in my vacant living room, clutching a $20,000 check that no one desired. The hush bore down on my ears like deep water. I placed the check on the coffee table, observing it quiver lightly in the draft from the AC vent. $20,000 diminished to a useless scrap by a handful of thoughtless remarks. Outside, Micah's BMW vanished around the bend, carrying my daughter away. I dropped back into my chair, the leather groaning under me. The place seemed altered now, more confined, as if the walls had inched closer during their stay. Every known item appeared to taunt me, The family pictures grinning from the shelf, the guitar case collecting dust in the nook, the heap of bills that never diminished. My phone vibrated on the side table. The buzz pierced the stillness like a blade, startling me. I groped for my reading specs, peering at the glowing display. A message from Vera. "Skip coming to our wedding. We don't want your pity money." I scanned it twice, then thrice, the text unyielding. My digits danced over the screen, attempting to ring her, but it jumped straight to voicemail. Her taped greeting, upbeat and businesslike, invited a message post-tone. I couldn't utter a word. The device slid from my grasp, rattling onto the coffee table beside the check. My chest constricted, each inhale a deliberate act. This went beyond finances now. This was about forfeiting the sole kin I had remaining. I grabbed the phone once more, began composing a reply. "Vera, darling, I love you. Please don't erased. I only aim to assist. Sorry if erased. Can we chat? Please erased." No phrase felt adequate. None conveyed the empty pain blooming in my torso. The incredulity that my own child, my baby girl, could sever ties so utterly. The message echoed her style, but harsher somehow. More vicious than she'd ever acted, even in her stormiest adolescent phases. Micah's sway, perhaps. Or maybe this was her true self now, and I'd been too oblivious to notice. The afternoon glow angled through the panes, throwing elongated shadows over the floor. In the distance, a mower roared to life. Ordinary neighborhood noises that seemed worlds away. I remained seated, gripping my phone, fixated on that text, hoping for clarity to return. But none did. The check rested abandoned on the table, my signature already paling in the sunbeams. All that cash, all those months of prudent hoarding, pointless now. Not for being insufficient, but because they rejected it outright. Because they rejected me. The house groaned around me, easing into dusk. I ought to rise, prepare supper, tackle something useful with my remaining Saturday. Instead, I stayed rooted in my chair, clutching a phone weightier than rock, rereading the same harsh note until the letters blurred. Don't bother attending our wedding, my daughter's big day. The event I'd anticipated for months despite my doubts about Micah. The occasion where I'd intended to escort her down the aisle, deliver a toast on how proud Eleanor would feel, twirl with her like we did when she was tiny, perched on my shoes. Vanished. All vanished in 15 words on a display. I laid the phone aside and shuffled to the shelf, my legs wobbly below me. The family images lingered there like loyal companions, expressions locked in brighter eras. My fingertips skimmed the border of the biggest frame. Vera at 3, Eleanor cradling her on her lap, me in the rear with my vintage acoustic guitar. We appeared so whole. Then the recollection surged unbidden, instructing 5-year-old Vera to bike in our former driveway. Eleanor applauding from the porch, her palms cupped by her lips. "You've got it, sweetie. You've got it." And Vera's victorious giggle when she finally coasted off alone, teetering but resolute. Her training wheels whirling idly above the ground. I lifted another shot. Beach trip, 1998. The trio of us constructing a grand sand fortress, our palms coated in damp grit. Eleanor sported her beloved yellow sundress, the one that turned her eyes to amber. Vera, around 8, had sand in her locks and the widest grin I'd witnessed. The kitchen drew me in, habit steering my steps. I loaded the kettle with unsteady hands, the basic chore anchoring me to the now. But even amid these routine items, the reminiscences pursued. Eleanor weaving Vera's hair for school debut, her digits swift and steady. "Stay put, honey. We want you flawless." And me by the range, tossing flapjacks into whimsical forms, Mickey ears, crooked hearts, whatever to coax a grin from our anxious 6-year-old. The kettle shrieked. I streamed hot water over a tea bag, observing the brew deepen, breathing in the familiar Earl Grey aroma. Eleanor's top pick. She'd brew a pot nightly, nestling on the sofa between Vera and me for our household film evenings. Popcorn in a large wooden dish, covers knotted around our legs, us all debating the selection. "She inherited your obstinate side, Ted," Eleanor would murmur during Vera's teen years when our girl would stomp upstairs over some imagined slight. But even then, amid the fiercest spats, Vera would eventually slink back down, snuggle beside Eleanor on the couch, and accept reconciliation. I headed back to the shelf with my tea, examining each image like clues to a mystery. Here lay evidence of our past joy. Here was Vera at 16, cap askew, embracing both parents with real warmth. "I love you both," she declared that day. So much. When had that shifted? When had I turned into someone whose affection was mere alms, whose attendance was undesired? After Eleanor departed? Likely. The burial, the awful months after, Vera withdrawing from me as if I carried contagion of sorrow. She'd been 25. Mature enough for loss, but perhaps too youthful to pardon me for failing to mend the void her mother created. I wasn't sufficient. Without Eleanor as the core, the bond keeping us intact, Vera and I had floated apart like wreckage post-storm. Separate fragments of the same kin, drifting separate ways. I grasped the latest photo, the three of us at Eleanor's final birthday, 2 months pre-diagnosis. We dined at her cherished spot, split a wine bottle, chuckled till our ribs ached. In the image, Eleanor's head leans on my shoulder as Vera stretches over the table, clasping her mom's hand. We seemed unbreakable then. Like no force could shatter us. The shelf clock rang 5:00. Had I truly lingered here over an hour? The tea had chilled in my grasp. The outdoor light had tilted toward night, and I was still clutching this picture, still striving to fathom how it all unraveled. 3 faces beamed from the frame. A full family oblivious to the agony lurking nearby. Eleanor's chuckle seemed to resonate from the glass. Vera's youthful call of "Daddy" from some far-off summer day. But the house's quiet was total now, interrupted only by the clock's tick and the creak of aged timber. The check remained on the coffee table overlooked. The phone mercifully stayed silent, and I stood amid the specters of finer times, gripping proof of our former selves, pondering if I'd ever witness my daughter beam at me that way again. The joyful family image slipped from my hold, swapped for another frame, this from 2 years on. Eleanor appeared so gaunt here, her cheekbones prominent under pale skin, her smile courageous yet weary. The hospital band on her wrist reflected the light. I recalled the sterile odor that stuck to all during those months, the infinite hallways with their harsh fluorescence, the beep of devices syncing with my dread. Eleanor's hand in mine, chilly and delicate as the physician uttered terms that weighed like boulders in my throat. Stage 3, he'd noted, tweaking his specs. We detected it soon enough for therapy, but it's fierce. Eleanor gripped my fingers with force I feared might snap them. Vera sat nearby, 28, but resembling a bewildered kid, her face ashen with disbelief. She hadn't uttered a peep through the whole consult, just gazed at the scans on the viewer as if commanding them to alter. The chemo rounds merged into one, ferrying Eleanor to the clinic every Tuesday and Thursday, seeing her locks tumble in bunches, acting unfazed when she vomited in the lot after. She donned scarves and caps, held her head high, bantered with the staff. But at home, when she believed herself unseen, I'd spot her gazing at mirrors with a look I'd never known. Vera stopped by less as months dragged. Job's hectic, she'd claim. Roads are jammed. She had her own life. But I glimpsed the true cause in her eyes when she viewed her mom. Dread. Raw, unfiltered fear of seeing her world's anchor fade bit by bit. "She's too young for this," Eleanor breathed to me one night as we watched Vera bolt after a brief stop. I should have had longer with her. The closing weeks were the harshest. Hospice gear crammed our bedroom, oxygen cylinders, drug timetables, a clinical bed that engulfed Eleanor entirely. Vera appeared daily then, but she hovered in the kitchen mostly, scrubbing spotless plates, sorting orderly shelves. "Why couldn't you rescue her?" Vera's whisper scarcely heard over the shuffle of grievers by Eleanor's coffin. Not blaming, just shattered. A query from a daughter who'd always trusted her dad could mend all. I attempted to embrace her at the service, but she retreated from my arms, folding hers around herself. She donned Eleanor's black gown from their final mother-daughter meal, and she mirrored her mother so much it pained my heart. The days post-funeral dragged eternally. I'd discover Vera in Eleanor's seat, clutching her mom's reading lenses or cherished mug, but she'd tense when I entered, as if my being evoked all we'd forfeited, all I'd neglected to safeguard. "She'll rely on you more than before," Eleanor had confided in one of her final lucid instants. "Don't allow her to shove you off, Ted. She'll attempt it, but resist." But I permitted it. Each time Vera retreated, each excuse to skip visits, each glance past me rather than to me, I released her. I convinced myself she required room to mourn, that insisting would only push her farther. Now, clasping this photo of Eleanor's last Christmas among us, I could face the reality I'd dodged. Vera hadn't merely lost her mom that day. She'd lost trust in me as well. Lost the conviction that I could shield our loved ones, that I possessed the strength to bind our family sans Eleanor at the heart. The picture shook in my grasp. Eleanor's gaze met mine, still vivid with optimism despite the disease tearing through her. She'd relied on me to tend our daughter, and I'd let her down. Let them both down. I placed Eleanor's image back on the shelf and trudged to the kitchen, instinct leading me through the well-known routine. Coffee, Eleanor's vintage ceramic cups, the ones with small nicks on the edges we'd never fixed. The habit rang empty now, like staging a show for vacant seats. Vapor wafted from the new brew as I poured, the deep scent permeating the quiet. But instead of comfort, the smell brought back another memory. The first time Micah had visited our home. Vera had been nervous that day, straightening couch cushions that didn't need straightening, checking the bathroom mirror 3 times. I'd made my famous lasagna, the recipe Eleanor had perfected over 20 years of Sunday dinners. So this is where Vera grew up. Micah's voice had carried a tone I couldn't quite place at first. Cozy. The word hung in the air like smoke from a cigarette. Not small cozy, not modest cozy. Everything about my life reduced to one patronizing syllable. He'd walked through our living room with the careful precision of someone touring a museum, his eyes cataloging every worn piece of furniture, every faded family photo, every visible sign of what Eleanor and I had built together over 3 decades. We should probably eat out, he'd suggested when I invited him to stay for dinner. There's this great place downtown. You'd love it, Mr. Grant, Vera had agreed immediately. That sounds wonderful, Dad. Maybe we should try something new. Something new. As if 30 years of Sunday lasagna dinners were something to be ashamed of, something to outgrow. I watched them leave from my kitchen window, Micah's hand on Vera's back, guiding her toward his sleek BMW. Through the glass, I could hear him saying something about the neighborhood, about property values, about areas with more potential. The visits that followed grew shorter and less frequent. When they did come, Micah would make casual observations that felt like paper cuts. Tiny, precise wounds that didn't bleed but never quite healed. My father always says a man's worth is measured by what he provides, he'd mentioned one evening, glancing around our modest living room. Success leaves clues, you know. Vera had started looking at our house differently after that. I'd catch her noticing things she'd never seen before. The water stain on the ceiling, the threadbare spots in the carpet, the way the kitchen faucet dripped no matter how tightly I turned the handle. Don't you want something better than this? I'd overheard Micah ask her one afternoon as they stood in our driveway. Better than this? Better than the home where she'd learned to walk, where Eleanor had read her bedtime stories, where we'd celebrated every birthday and holiday for 30 years. Maybe Dad should consider downsizing, Vera had said during one of their visits. This place is getting too big for him to maintain alone. She'd been looking at Micah when she said it, seeking his approval. The daughter, who used to defend me against playground bullies, was now suggesting I abandoned the home Eleanor and I had chosen together, the place where every room held memories of our life as a family. I should have fought back then. Should have reminded Vera of Sunday mornings when she'd climb into our bed between Eleanor and me, of the garden, where her mother had taught her the names of flowers, of the kitchen where we'd made pancakes shaped like butterflies every birthday morning. Instead, I'd smiled politely and offered them coffee in Eleanor's chipped mugs. The coffee in my hands had grown cold while I stood lost in these memories. Outside the kitchen window, my neighbor was mowing his lawn, the sound of steady drone that seemed to come from another world. A normal Saturday afternoon in a normal suburban neighborhood, while my life fell apart one polite conversation at a time. Micah had won without ever declaring war. He'd simply shown Vera a different version of success, one where love was measured in dollar signs and worth was calculated by square footage. And I'd been too grief-stricken, too polite, too afraid of losing what little I had left of my daughter to fight for her respect. 6 days crawled by since that brutal text message, each one blending into the next like watercolors in rain. Sunday morning brought my first attempt to call Vera, but her phone went straight to voicemail. That cheerful professional recording that felt like another slap across the face. Hi, sweetheart. It's Dad, I just wanted to. The beep cut me off before I could finish. I stared at my phone, wondering if 30 seconds was enough to say everything I needed to say or if 30 years wouldn't be sufficient. Monday and Tuesday followed the same pattern. One call each day straight to voicemail, messages that grew increasingly desperate. Vera, please call me back. I love you, honey. We should talk about this. By Wednesday, I stopped calling altogether. Instead, I threw myself into cleaning corners of the house I'd been avoiding since Eleanor died. Closets full of her belongings that I couldn't bear to sort through. Her perfume still lingered on the dresses I'd never had the strength to donate. Her reading glasses sat on the nightstand beside our bed, waiting for her return. Thursday brought drafted text messages that I typed and deleted. A letter I wrote longhand but couldn't bring myself to mail. My handwriting looked shaky, old. Nothing like the confident script that used to sign autographs for fans who remembered my band's brief moment of success. Friday morning found me in Eleanor's garden, pulling weeds from around her rose bushes. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory guiding me through her careful instructions from summers past. Not too close to the roots, Ted. Give them room to breathe. The dirt felt good under my fingernails. Honest work that required nothing but attention and care. The afternoon sun was warm on my shoulders when my phone buzzed against my leg. Another telemarketer, probably. Or maybe the pharmacy reminding me to pick up my blood pressure medication. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. Maybe hope, maybe habit, maybe the desperate part of me that still believed in miracles. Dad, can we meet and talk? I'm sorry about everything. I read the message 3 times before the words registered, 4 times before I believed them. My fingers shook as I typed back, deleting and retyping until the response felt right. Of course, sweetheart. When and where? Her reply came quickly. Corner Cafe on Maple Street. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll be there. I set the phone down carefully as if sudden movements might shatter this fragile possibility. Then I walked inside and stood before the bathroom mirror, studying the face that looked back at me. Gray stubble, deeper lines around my eyes, the weight loss that made my shirts hang loose around my shoulders. Would she notice how much I'd aged in 6 days? Should I shave, dress up, try to look like the father she remembered instead of the broken man I'd become? The printed text message crinkled in my shirt pocket when I touched it. Proof that this wasn't another dream, another wishful fantasy born from too much solitude and regret. Tomorrow at 2 I'd see my daughter again. Tomorrow maybe we could begin to find our way back to each other. 15 minutes early, as always. I sat at a corner table in the Sunset Bistro, checking my watch for the 4th time in 2 minutes. The cafe hummed with Saturday morning energy. Young professionals on laptops, families with strollers, the kind of place where a single cup of coffee costs more than I used to spend in groceries for a week. My hand smoothed down my shirt collar, the same navy button-down I'd worn to Eleanor's funeral, clean, pressed, but showing its age around the cuffs. When Vera walked through the glass doors at exactly 2 hours, I felt my chest tighten with relief. She looked beautiful, expensive, too. Her designer purse alone probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. But her eyes held the uncertainty of a child who'd broken something precious and wasn't sure if forgiveness was possible. Dad? Her voice caught slightly. Thank you for coming, sweetheart. I stood up too quickly, nearly knocking over my coffee. Of course I came. We hugged awkwardly across the small table, her perfume unfamiliar and sophisticated. When we sat down, silence stretched between us like a chasm neither of us knew how to cross. Your coffee is getting cold, she said, nodding at my untouched cup. I was nervous, I admitted. Didn't want to spill it when you arrived. That earned me a small smile, the first genuine one I'd seen from her in months. Dad, I'm so sorry about everything. The way I treated you, that horrible text message. Vera, honey, all that matters is that we're talking now. Don't let me finish. She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly around her latte. I was cruel, unforgivably cruel. And the things Micah said about your house, about your situation. He was right, though. I can't provide what you deserve. Stop. Her voice was firm, reminiscent of Eleanor when she'd made up her mind about something. You gave me everything that mattered. Love, stability, a childhood full of memories I treasure. Micah knows that now. He feels terrible about what he said. He wants to apologize to you personally. I nodded, though something twisted in my stomach. People like Micah didn't suddenly develop conscience pangs. But maybe I was being unfair. Maybe the stress of planning a wedding had made everyone say things they didn't mean. I still want to give you the $20,000, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket where the check waited carefully folded. It's all I have, but it's yours, Dad, no. Vera reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. Buford House already covered everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers, everything. We don't need your money. We don't need your money. The words hit harder than she'd intended. Not we appreciate the offer or you're so generous. But we don't need as if my contribution was irrelevant rather than insufficient. I want you there, she continued, oblivious to the wound she just opened. I need my father at my wedding. Will you walk me down the aisle? My throat felt thick with emotion. Nothing would make me prouder. The ceremony is next Saturday, 3 hours at Ocean View Country Club in Malibu. It's going to be beautiful. Ocean views, about 200 guests. 200 guests. I tried to imagine standing among that crowd, shaking hands with Buford's wealthy friends, making small talk about investments and vacation homes and all the things that filled their lives but were foreign to mine. I'll be there, I promised. We talked for another hour. Careful conversation that danced around the deeper issues. Vera told me about wedding details, the imported flowers, the live quartet, the dinner menu that read like poetry. I listened and nodded and tried to share her excitement, even as each lavish detail reminded me how far outside this world I truly belonged. When we finally stood to leave, she hugged me properly this time, holding on long enough for me to smell her expensive shampoo and feel how thin she'd gotten. "I love you, Dad," she whispered against my shoulder. "I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know." Outside the caf, her BMW gleamed in the afternoon sunshine. I walked her to the driver's side, noting the leather seats, the pristine interior, the dashboard that looked like a spaceship compared to my old Honda. "See you next Saturday," she said, sliding behind the wheel. I watched her drive away, her car disappearing into traffic like a sleek fish returning to its natural element. Then I stood alone on the sidewalk, surrounded by the sounds of wealth and success, feeling simultaneously grateful and utterly inadequate. The reconciliation I dreamed about for a week had happened. My daughter loved me again, wanted me at her wedding, had apologized for her cruelty. So why did I feel like I'd lost something instead of gained it back? The drive home from downtown took 45 minutes through Saturday afternoon traffic, giving me too much time to replay every word of our conversation. Vera's apology had been genuine, her love real. But underneath it all, I sensed the subtle architecture of her new life, a life where my $20,000 was unnecessary, where Buford's generosity made my sacrifices insignificant. My house looked smaller when I pulled into the driveway, shabby even. Paint peeling around the window frames, lawn that needed cutting, the kind of modest middle-class dwelling that people like Micah probably drove past without seeing. Inside, I spread the wedding invitation across my kitchen table, studying the elegant script, the heavy cardstock that probably costs more per sheet than I spent on a week's groceries. Ocean View Country Club, I'd looked it up online. Exclusive membership, oceanfront location, the kind of place where parking valet earned more in tips than I collected in Social Security. Despite Vera's refusal, I pulled out my checkbook and began writing carefully. $20,000, my entire financial worth reduced to numbers on a piece of paper. I'd attach a note, something simple about love being more valuable than money, about wanting to contribute to her happiness. 3 drafts of the note went into my wastebasket before I got the wording right. Too sentimental in the first version, too formal in the second. The third struck the right balance for my beautiful daughter on her wedding day. Love, Dad. My best suit hung in the bedroom closet, protected by a plastic dry cleaning bag that crinkled when I touched it. Navy blue with thin pinstripes. Purchased for Eleanor's funeral and worn perhaps 3 times since. The fabric was quality wool, but the style screamed early 2000s. Wide lapels, slightly boxy cut. The kind of suit that would immediately identify me as someone who couldn't afford to keep up with fashion trends. I held it up to the bedroom mirror, trying to see myself as Vera's wealthy new family would see me. The suit was clean, pressed, dignified in its way, but next to Micah's designer attire, next to whatever Buford would be wearing, I'd look like exactly what I was, a man doing his best with limited resources. The gift envelope required careful consideration, too casual, and it would look like I didn't take the occasion seriously, too elaborate, and it might seem like I was trying too hard to impress. I settled on cream-colored stationery from the box Eleanor had given me years ago, tucking the check and note inside with the precise care of someone who understood that presentation mattered when you had little else to offer. Evening crept across my house like fog rolling in from the ocean. He made a simple dinner, soup and crackers, and sat at my kitchen table looking out at Eleanor's garden. She would have known what to wear to a wedding at Ocean View Country Club, would have helped me navigate the social complexities of wealth and status. Without her, I felt like an actor who'd forgotten his lines. The alarm clock beside my bed showed 9:47 when I finally turned out the lights. 1 week until the wedding. 1 week to mentally prepare for a world where my daughter belonged, but I remained forever an outsider. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of my old house settling around me. Somewhere in Malibu, 200 people would gather next Saturday to celebrate Vera's new beginning. I'd be among them, wearing my outdated suit and carrying my modest gift, proud of my daughter, but acutely aware of everything I couldn't provide. The wedding invitation sat on my nightstand, cream and gold elegant against the worn wood. Tomorrow I'd iron my shirt, polish my only pair of dress shoes, practice small talk for conversations I'd never truly belonged to. But tonight I simply held the envelope containing my $20,000 gift and wondered if love could ever be enough when the world measured worth in currency I'd never possess. My Honda looked like a Rusco-colored beetle among the gleaming luxury vehicles in the Ocean View Country Club parking lot. Mercedes, BMW, Porsche, cars that cost more than I'd earned in my best years with the band. The young valet who took my keys managed to keep his expression neutral, but I caught the slight raise of his eyebrows as he glanced at my car's dented bumper. "Welcome to Ocean View, sir," he said politely, handing me a numbered ticket. The clubhouse entrance was all marble and crystal, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing an impossible view of the Pacific Ocean. Guests flowed through the space in designer formal wear, their conversations a symphony of confidence and casual wealth. I clutched the envelope containing my gift, suddenly aware of how my navy suit stood out, not in a good way, among the impeccably dressed crowd. "Excuse me, are you at the Grant party or the Thompson party?" A young woman with a clipboard and headset approached me with professional efficiency. "Grant, I'm Theodore Grant, Verna's father." Her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of recognition followed by something that might have been pity. "Of course, right this way, Mr. Grant, you're at table 12. Table 12 sat near the back of the reception area, close to the kitchen doors. Not exactly the place of honor for the father of the bride, but then again Buford was paying for this elaborate production. I was more guests than family here. "And what line of work are you in?" The man seated next to me extended a manicured hand. His watch alone probably cost more than my annual income. "I'm retired," I said, which was technically true. "Oh, wonderful. What did you retire from?" The conversation died when I mentioned my modest pension and Social Security. He turned to discuss real estate investments with the woman on his other side, leaving me to observe the magnificent chaos around me. Waiters in black uniforms glided between tables carrying champagne flutes and elaborate hors. A string quartet played softly near the Ocean View windows. Floral arrangements that probably cost thousands of dollars created fragrant sculptures throughout the space. I calculated costs automatically. A habit developed during Eleanor's illness when every dollar had mattered. The flowers alone represented months of my income. The champagne being poured so freely costs more per bottle than I spent on groceries in a week. Daddy Vera appeared beside my table, radiant in her flowing white gown. For a moment, she was just my little girl again, the child who used to dance on my feet in our living room, while Eleanor played piano. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I managed, standing to hug her carefully, mindful of her elaborate dress and professional makeup. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered, but her eyes were already scanning the crowd, tracking the dozens of details that required her attention as the bride. "Where should I put this?" I held up my gift envelope, suddenly conscious of its simplicity among the towering display of elaborately wrapped presents near the entrance. "Just put it with the others," she said distractedly, already moving toward the next group of guests requiring acknowledgement. I walked to the gift table, my cream envelope looking like a child's drawing next to the professional wrapping and elegant ribbons surrounding it. $20,000, my entire financial worth, reduced to the most modest offering in a sea of extravagant generosity. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats for the ceremony." The crowd began moving toward the outdoor pavilion, where chairs were arranged in perfect rows facing the ocean. I found my assigned seat in the third row from the back, far from the family section, where Micah's relatives sat in expensive fabrics and confident postures. Ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and jasmine as guests settled into their places. Somewhere in this perfectly choreographed production, my daughter would marry into a world where my love mattered, but my presence was merely tolerated. The string quartet transitioned into wedding music, and I gripped the program in my hands, watching as Buford Thompson's world prepared to welcome my daughter permanently into its embrace. Crystal clinked against crystal as the reception began in earnest. I found myself seated at table 12 with distant relatives I barely recognized, second cousins and family friends who offered polite smiles before turning to more interesting conversations about vacation homes in Tuscany and investment portfolios. The dinner was spectacular, each course more elaborate than anything I'd eaten in years. Lobster bisque, filet mignon with truffle sauce, wines that probably cost more per bottle than I spent on food in a month. I ate carefully, conscious of every movement, every sound my fork made against the expensive china. Laughter rippled across the room as stories were shared and toasts prepared. From the head table I could see Vera glowing with happiness, Micah beside her, looking every inch the successful groom. Buford commanded attention at the center, regaling guests with animated stories that drew appreciative chuckles. When Micah stood up tapping his crystal glass with a silver knife, the room fell silent with expectation. He looked confident, comfortable, born to this moment of being the center of attention in a room full of important people. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this special day," he began, his voice carrying easily across the space. "Vera and I are so grateful to have family and friends who've supported our journey together." Approving murmurs drifted across the tables. I shifted uncomfortably, sensing something in Micah's tone that made my stomach tighten. "Family is everything," Micah continued, his eyes sweeping the room. "And speaking of family, I want to acknowledge someone very special here tonight, Vera's father, Theodore Grant." Every head in the room turned toward me. I felt heat creep up my neck as 200 pairs of eyes focused on my table, on my outdated suit, on the envelope containing my inadequate gift. Theodore represents something we don't see much anymore. A man who's learned to live within his means. Micah's smile was bright, seemingly innocent, but his words cut like surgical instruments. While the rest of us chase success and material things, Theodore has found contentment in simplicity. His modest little house, his careful budgeting, his, what would you call it, rustic approach to life. Laughter began to ripple across the room, polite at first, then growing bolder as guests realized this was meant to be amusing. In fact, Micah continued warming to his theme. When Theodore generously offered to contribute to our wedding, he brought out his checkbook with the pride of a man offering his very last $20, which, let's be honest, it probably was. The laughter grew louder now. I sat frozen, my face burning with humiliation, as Micah painted me as a figure of gentle mockery, the poor relative everyone tolerates but nobody takes seriously. "So, let's raise our glasses to Theodore Grant," Micah concluded, lifting his champagne flute high. A reminder that happiness doesn't require a bank account, that love transcends material success, and that sometimes the greatest gift is simply knowing your place in the world. The applause was thunderous. Guests raised their glasses toward me, their faces bright with patronizing amusement. I was the wedding entertainment, the quaint poor relative whose struggles made everyone else feel generous and enlightened. But then something shifted. From across the room, Buford Thompson's face had gone pale. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't identify, recognition mixed with disbelief. His mouth opened slightly, champagne glass forgotten in his hand. "Wait," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the dying laughter. "Wait just a minute." The room fell silent again, but this time with confusion instead of amusement. Buford stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. "Aren't you Theodore Grant from Electric Storm?" Silence crashed over the banquet hall like a wave. Every fork stopped midway to mouths. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Buford Thompson stood frozen at the head table, pointing at me with a trembling finger, his face transformed by recognition. "Electric Storm," he repeated louder this time. "The band Midnight Highway, Broken Dreams, Thunder Roll. That was you, wasn't it?" Other guests began turning in their seats, studying my face with new intensity. I heard whispered conversations starting. Electric Storm, that rock band from the 90s. They had like 3 #1 hits. Micah still held his microphone, but his confident smile had frozen into something resembling panic. He looked between his father and me as if we were speaking a foreign language. "Yes," I said quietly, my voice somehow carrying across the silent room. I was the lead singer of Electric Storm. The admission hit the crowd like an earthquake. Chairs scraped against marble as people leaned forward, suddenly seeing me not as the poor relation, but as someone whose music had soundtracked their younger years. "I knew it," Buford practically shouted, abandoning his table to stride across the room toward me. "I saw you guys at the Forum in '96. Front row, you signed my girlfriend's shirt." Other voices joined in now, the excitement building like a thunderstorm. "I had all your albums. Didn't you guys sell out Madison Square Garden? Whatever happened to Electric Storm?" I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. The room spun slightly as decades of buried memories crashed back. The screaming crowds, the sold-out venues, the record deals and magazine covers and money that flowed like water. What happened to the band? Buford asked breathlessly, now standing directly in front of me. I left, I said simply. When Vera was born, I walked away from everything. Music, touring, recording, all of it. But why? Someone called out from across the room. You guys were huge. I looked at Vera sitting at the head table with tears streaming down her face, finally, understanding the magnitude of what I'd sacrificed. Because being a father mattered more than being famous. Because I wanted to be there for every school play, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. Because some things are more important than success, and your wife's illness, Buford said softly, his fan enthusiasm giving way to human understanding. I read about that in Rolling Stone years later. You spent everything on her treatment, didn't you? The room held its breath. Every penny, I confirmed. The house, the cars, the investments, everything went to keeping Eleanor alive as long as possible. I'd make the same choice again tomorrow. Applause began slowly, starting with Buford and spreading across the room like wildfire. But this wasn't the patronizing clapping from Micah's toast. This was genuine admiration, respect for a man who'd chosen love over legacy, family over fame. Micah still stood with the microphone in his hand, his face white with shock. The man he'd spent months mocking, the father-in-law he'd dismissed as a failure, was a rock star who'd voluntarily given up everything for the family Micah was now joining. Ladies and gentlemen, Buford announced, his voice thick with emotion, we're in the presence of true greatness, not the kind that comes from money or status, but the kind that comes from sacrifice and love. The applause grew louder, guests rising from their seats. Someone shouted, "Elect Electric Storm." Others began chanting it. I stood there in my outdated suit, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune, finally receiving their cognition I'd never sought, but somehow desperately needed. From across the room, Verna's eyes met mine through her tears, and in them I saw understanding, remorse, and something that looked like awe. My daughter was finally seeing me, not as the inadequate man she'd grown ashamed of, but as the father who'd loved her enough to sacrifice everything. Through the standing ovation, I watched Vera rise from the het, her wedding gown flowing behind her like sea foam as she moved toward me. Tears streaked her makeup, but she looked more beautiful than she had all day. Raw, real, finally seeing me clearly after years of looking through me. "Dad?" she whispered when she reached me, her voice breaking on the single syllable. I opened my arms and she fell into them, sobbing against my shoulder. The way she had as a child after nightmares, her expensive perfume mixed with the salt of tears, her designer dress creasing against my old suit, but none of that mattered now. "Forgive me," she choked out between sobs. "I never knew what you sacrificed for me. I never understood. Sweetheart, there's nothing to forgive," I murmured, stroking her hair the way Eleanor used to. "I got the greatest gift watching you grow up. Every song I didn't write, every stage I didn't perform on, it was all worth it for you." Around us, the applause continued, but it felt distant now. Background noise to this moment I'd been waiting 3 years to experience. My daughter in my arms again, really seeing me, really understanding what our family had meant. Micah appeared beside us, the microphone still clutched in his hand, his face pale with shame. "Mr. Grant," he said, his voice barely audible above the continuing ovation. "Sir, I had no idea. I'm deeply ashamed of everything I've said, everything I've assumed." I looked at him over Vera's head, this young man who'd spent months diminishing me, and saw genuine horror in his eyes. Not embarrassment at being caught, but true recognition of the pain he'd caused. "You didn't know," I said simply. "That's no excuse." He lifted the microphone with shaking hands. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention once more?" The crowd quieted, sensing the shift in emotional tenor. "I owe someone a profound apology," Micah continued, his voice stronger now. "Theodore Grant is not just a rock legend who chose family over fame. He's the kind of man I hope to become, someone who understands that love and sacrifice matter more than money or status. Sir, I'm honored to call you family." He stepped forward and extended his hand. His hook it firmly, seeing something different in his eyes now. Not the calculating assessment of my worth, but genuine respect for choices he was only beginning to understand. "To Theodore Grant," Buford shouted from across the room, raising his champagne glass high. "A true hero." To Theodore, the crowd responded, and suddenly I was surrounded by people who wanted to shake my hand, to tell me about concerts they'd attended, albums they'd owned, how my music had been the soundtrack to their youth. But the most important voice was Vera's whispering against my shoulder, as we held each other in the center of the storm. "I'm so proud to be your daughter." she said. "I'm so sorry it took me this long to remember what that really means." The party swirled around us. Laughter and music and the clink of expensive glasses. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Not because of the applause or the recognition, but because my daughter's arms were around me, and she finally understood the depth of love that had shaped every choice I'd ever made. When we finally separated, Buford insisted I join the family at the head table, moving chairs to make room beside Vera. As I settled into my new place of honor, I looked across the room at the gift table, where my modest envelope sat among the elaborate packages. $20,000. Still everything I had, still not much compared to the wealth surrounding me, but for the first time it felt like enough. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.